I've been treated like a failure my entire life. What happened when they recognized me will move you. There was a day that never left my mind. I was standing in front of the mirror, already in uniform, ready for another decoration ceremony. Outside, hundreds of people, flashbulbs, dignitaries. Inside, an emptiness I couldn't explain. I knew that once again, my parents would be there. And I also knew that, probably, their gaze would be the same as always. Distant, cold, as if I weren't enough. The uniform bore medals, but inside I felt like I carried invisible scars. I'd commanded men in places where the chance of returning alive was slim, but nothing made me as nervous as the thought of facing my parents' silence. I remembered them cheering for my brother, as if I didn't even exist. This day had all the makings of another day in which I would smile on the outside and bleed on the inside. When the ceremony began, I stood still, trying to maintain my usual posture. The anthem, the speeches, the applause, everything went as planned. I was used to holding back my emotions, but that day something was different. I felt I'd reached my limit. I could no longer pretend it didn't affect me. With each name announced, each clap, my heart seemed to scream, "Look at me," just once. Not as a soldier, not as a colonel, but as a son. I wanted to hear something simple, but it never came. "We are proud of you." And absurd as it may seem, this need embarrassed me. I was in my 40s, with a solid career, respect within the army, and yet I was still that invisible boy wanting to be seen. The moment arrived. My name was called. I stood up, walked to the stage, and received the medal. Applause, photos, handshakes, a script I already knew by heart, only this time my eyes fell on the audience and met theirs. And for a second, I saw something I'd never seen before. My father didn't look away. He didn't look at my brother or at some random corner. He looked at me. I felt a chill run through my body. My hand trembled. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, but no, he was really looking. A look that held neither contempt nor that cutting indifference. It was different, as if he finally saw who I was. In that moment, I thought back years. I remembered the times he'd called me a loser when I'd decided to pursue a military career. I remembered his and my mother's jokes, saying I'd only chosen that to run away from home, that I'd never amount to anything. I remembered the silence on the day I left for my first mission, without even a "take care." I carried each word like a weight, and that weight had pushed me down so many times. And in that look, it felt like a part of that burden was falling away. Not because the past had been erased, but because perhaps he finally understood who I'd become. When the ceremony ended, I braced myself for the worst. I was convinced I would hear only the same generic phrases again, or worse, nothing at all. But he walked toward me, his steps firm. He stopped in front of me, took a deep breath, and spoke in a choked voice. "I'm proud of you, son." It was 7 words. That was all. But in that moment, it was as if years of silence had been broken. I didn't cry in front of him. I couldn't, I was paralyzed. Only when I returned home, later that night, in the silence of my room, did I break down. I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a kid. Not from sadness, but from a mixture of relief, pent-up anger, and a peace I had never felt before. My name is Rogerio, I'm 42 years old, and I never imagined I could feel something as simple as relief from an "I'm proud." I grew up feeling invisible at home. Every compliment given to my brother felt like a punch to my self-esteem. I learned early on to swallow the pain, to hide the frustration, to convince myself I didn't need their approval for anything. But even trying, this lack of recognition followed me in every choice, every mission, every step I took. It was this feeling of invisibility that pushed me into the army, into the most dangerous places, hoping to find a space where I truly mattered. And in a way I did, but the emptiness of home remained, haunting me, reminding me that no trophy, no medal, no position could fill that hole that only a father and a mother could see. I vividly remember when Isabel came into my life. She saw my scars before anyone else. Not the physical ones, but the ones no one else wanted to see. The loneliness, the shame, the pain of being constantly belittled. With her, I learned to trust, to talk about my wounds without fear. But even with all her support, a part of me still carried that emptiness my parents insisted on leaving. And that day, at the ceremony, it was as if all that weight became visible all at once. My father's gaze was only a moment, but it showed me that belated validation could still happen. And it was in that instant that I realized my story could finally begin to be rewritten, not by what I had done for the world, but by what he finally saw in me. After the ceremony, Lourdes, my aunt, took me aside. She was the first to break the ice and make me laugh about memories I hadn't even remembered. Childhood stories, little pranks, silly moments no one remembered. And it was funny how suddenly these memories seemed important. They reconnected me with my family in a way I thought impossible. I realized that their silence didn't mean complete lack of love, just an inability to express their feelings. And that perhaps all the coldness I'd felt since childhood stemmed from fear, pride, and insecurity. This didn't erase the pain, but it provided an explanation I needed to hear to finally let the anger begin to subside. My mother, Clarice, was the last to open up. She told me she'd never forgotten me, that she'd secretly received news from me, kept photos Isabel sent, memories of me that only she knew. In that moment, I felt the strangest mix. Shame for having imagined. They didn't care, and gratitude for finally understanding that they did care in their own way. My brother Daniel hugged me and said he'd joined the Navy inspired by me, not to please our father, and that he'd always admired me. And I realized that my perception of my own family was wrong, shaped by years of silence and misunderstandings. That showed me that it's never too late to rebuild relationships, even when all seems lost. It was there, on that day, that I realized my greatest battle wasn't against enemies in the field, but against the fear of never being seen and recognized by those I loved most. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but a quiet, internal one. Upon returning home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The feeling of finally being seen, even if late, was liberating. I realized that my military achievements, impressive as they were only complete when I understood that I could be accepted and recognized for my worth, even in the face of those who made me feel invisible. That day marked a turning point, and from then on, I began to think not only about my career, but about the future I wanted to build with Isabel, far from old wounds, but still carrying the lessons of each scar. The week after the ceremony, I still couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Each memory brought conflicting feelings, old anger, shame, but also a calm I hadn't known. I realized that for years I'd tried to fill a void with achievements, medals, and recognition from others, and none of it replaced the simple fact of being seen and loved. Isabel watched me silently, understanding that something profound had changed within me. It wasn't just about the ceremony or my father's approval, it was about realizing I could exist without fear within my own family. For the first time, I felt complete without having to prove anything to anyone, not even myself. I spent days reflecting on how cruel silence can be. It shapes us, makes us doubt ourselves, makes us hide our emotions. I learned to swallow my pain for fear of not being accepted. But then I realized that hiding everything wasn't the solution. I started talking more to Isabel, opening up about my emotions honestly, without shame. I talked about my fear, about my feelings of failure, about every moment I felt inferior to my brother. And for the first time, I felt someone listening to me without judgment, truly understanding me. It was the first time I realized that my painful experiences could become tools for growth, not just scars that weighed on me. Over time, I realized I needed to do something with all this. I couldn't let other men who had experienced family trauma carry this pain alone. That's when I started thinking about what would become the Operation Truth Center. The idea grew from conversations with Isabel, from my own experiences of emotional abandonment, from what I felt when I was finally seen. I wanted a space where veterans and even entire families could deal with the silence, the rejection, the traumas no one can explain. I wanted to offer what it took me decades to receive: listening, understanding, and recognition. I knew it wouldn't erase my past, but I could transform my pain into something that would help others. Even with the feeling of relief, I knew that overcoming didn't mean forgetting or eliminating the past. Every memory still hurt. Every criticism I'd received still resonated at times, and I had to deal with it daily. But what changed was that I could now see these pains as part of my history, not as something that defined me negatively. I had tools to process my feelings, and this allowed me to be more present, more confident, and more resilient. I discovered that overcoming is continuous, that it doesn't happen all at once, but in small moments of clarity, like that day of the ceremony. Today, looking back, I see how the transformation began on that specific day, in front of so many people, with my father's simple words. I learned that recognition has no expiration date, and that it's never too late to rebuild bonds, even the most difficult ones. I learned to value my achievements not as a way to prove something to someone, but as proof that I resisted, that I survived, that I succeeded. And more than that, I learned that the true value of a victory lies not in medals or titles, but in the ability to reconcile with one's own history, to transform pain into strength and hope. And that, I believe, is what truly makes a difference in anyone's life. After that ceremony, my relationship with my parents began to change subtly. It wasn't overnight. There were no miracles, but small gestures began to appear. My father began asking me about my routine, showing genuine interest in my field stories. My mother began seeking me out more, sharing memories of my childhood, showing that she cared in a way I'd never realized. Each small gesture was a brick breaking down a wall that had been built by decades of silence and indifference. I was afraid of getting too attached, of getting my hopes up, but I also felt a joy I couldn't hide. It was a strange mix of caution and hope. Isabel was with me every step of the way. She supported me, reminding me that I didn't have to forgive everything at once, that I could move forward in my own time. I realized that my strength came from her, but also from myself, from my ability to resist the scars of the past. I began to allow myself to feel proud of myself and not just wait for someone to say so. Every compliment that came from outside the family carried weight, but nothing compared to having my father look me in the eye and finally recognize my worth. I discovered that love, recognition, and respect may come late, but they still make all the difference. The Operation Truth Center slowly began to become a reality. I immersed myself in planning, conversations, and meetings, always remembering how invisible I felt. Every decision was guided by the idea of creating a safe space where people could be heard without fear, where veterans could talk about their pain, and where families could learn to cope with the silence and coldness that hurt so much. I wanted to transform my experience into something concrete, something that would impact the lives of others. And even when challenges arose, I knew I was doing something deeply meaningful, something worth every effort. At the same time, my relationship with Daniel changed. He looked at me with more admiration, not only for being the older brother who inspired choices, but for being someone who survived hardship and still managed to build something meaningful. I felt a silent gratitude for him, showing me that seemingly cruel gestures don't always mean contempt, and that understanding and love can appear in unexpected ways. Every hug, every conversation was a reminder that relationships can be rebuilt when there's a willingness to see oneself and the other. This brought me a relief I hadn't felt since adolescence. And it was in this process, in this combination of family reconstruction and the creation of the center, that I realized that my greatest victory wasn't military, it wasn't a medal or a position. It was this ability to transform pain into something positive, to create space for others to experience the same overcoming. I still feel the wound of old indifference. I still carry the weight of years of rejection, but now I know I can deal with it without it defining me. I learned that true strength lies not in ignoring pain, but in acknowledging, accepting, and moving forward, building something that has real meaning for myself and for others. With the Operation Truth Center up and running, I began to realize something I'd never imagined, that my experience could inspire others to face what I'd faced. Every veteran who arrived, every family who participated, every story of pain I heard reminded me that I wasn't alone and that no one should have to endure silence and coldness without support. It was a strange feeling, because for so long I'd been invisible, and now I saw myself as someone capable of making a difference. I realized that overcoming adversity isn't just about winning for yourself, but about transforming your own pain into tools of support for others. This gave me purpose, something no military title could ever offer. Isabel and I began planning to adopt a child. The idea of raising someone in an environment filled with love, attention, and respect made me reflect on everything I didn't have and everything I can now offer. It's strange to think that I, who spent my life seeking validation, can now offer emotional security and a constant presence. It's as if life has finally given me a second chance, not to erase the past, but to do things differently, to build something true and solid. I feel fear and responsibility, but also immense hope. For the first time, I know that the future we've built can be better than any expectations I ever had. There are still difficult moments. The past sometimes hits home, memories of coldness, cruel words, the feeling of not being enough. But now I can face these memories without drowning in them. I've learned to separate what was useless pain from what was a lesson. Each scar reminds me that I survived, that resilience is something built day by day. It's not about forgetting or blindly forgiving. It's about acknowledging, accepting, and moving forward without carrying the weight of decades of hurt. It's about finding strength in small victories and realizing that every step we take toward truth and reconciliation counts far more than any medal. What happened that day of the ceremony changed my life in ways I never imagined. My father's simple phrase, 7 words, had the power to open doors that seemed closed forever. But more than that, it opened space within me to see that I had value, that I mattered, and that I was capable of creating my own story. I learned that overcoming pain isn't about erasing pain, but about transforming each experience into something that strengthens us, that makes us more human, more connected, and more capable of creating positive change. It was a long, silent, but necessary process. Today, I can look back on my life and feel proud of who I've become, even knowing the journey was painful and full of scars. The war I faced at home left its mark on me, but it didn't define me. With Isabel by my side, with the Operation Truth Center helping lives, and with the possibility of adopting and building a real family, I realize that the greatest victory isn't military, public, or recognized by medals or titles. It's the victory of being seen, of transforming pain into strength, and of finally writing a story in which truth, courage, and love prevail. This is my overcoming. After years of living under the weight of contempt and silence, I realized that overcoming doesn't mean erasing what happened, but being able to exist. Despite it, every gesture of recognition, every hug, every sincere conversation with Isabel showed me that I could rebuild my self-esteem. I learned that I didn't need worldwide applause, but small signs of acceptance and love, and that these small victories were immensely valuable. Today, I can smile without fear of not being enough, and that is already a victory worth more than any medal I've ever received. Working at the Operation Truth Center has become an extension of my own resilience. Every person who comes to us with pain, fear, or rejection reminds me of what I felt for so long, and each time I can help them find strength, accept themselves, or reconnect with loved ones, I feel like I'm transforming my own experience into something positive. This gives me purpose and meaning and makes me realize that the pain I carry can also be a source of transformation and hope for others. Today, I can look back on my story with clarity and feel proud not only of what I've accomplished, but of how I faced each emotional challenge that seemed insurmountable. Overcoming for me was learning to look at the past without fear, to face each wound and understand that they shaped me, but they don't define me. I can feel anger, sadness, and disappointment, but I can also find the strength to move forward, to create a better life, and to offer love and presence to those who need it. Adopting a child has become a symbol of this overcoming. It's the opportunity to offer something I never had: a safe environment full of attention and recognition. The idea of being able to guide, support, and love someone without that person having to fight for approval fills me with hope. It's as if I'm closing a cycle, transforming the pain of a difficult past into the strength to build something new, something real, something full of meaning. Ultimately, my greatest victory lies not in the medals, honors, or military career, but in my ability to rebuild myself emotionally. I learned that overcoming adversity is a daily process, requiring courage to face one's own story and transform each wound into a learning experience. Today, I can feel proud of who I am, recognize my own strength, and at the same time, offer support and hope to others facing similar situations. It's the certainty that even after so many years of pain, it's possible to bounce back and write a story where truth, love, and courage prevail. Today, I wake up every day with a different purpose. It's not just about surviving or accomplishing tasks. It's about making every step I take truly meaningful. I plan the Operation Truth Center. I think about new initiatives to help veterans and their families, and every story that reaches me reinforces that overcoming is possible. I feel that my experience serves as an example, and that every small step forward someone we help makes is, in a way, a victory for me too. This motivates me to keep going, even on days when everything feels overwhelming. My plans go beyond the center. I want to create emotional education programs for young people who are growing up with indifference or rejection at home. I know how deeply this can affect them and how much a lack of recognition can impact their self-esteem. My own journey has taught me that small interventions can change lives, and I want these young people to know they are not alone. Planning this gives me energy and makes me realize that overcoming challenges isn't just an individual thing, but something that multiplies when shared. With Isabel, we began setting goals to build our family, our home, and teach the value of affection and appreciation. We planned every detail with the goal of creating a safe space where mistakes aren't a source of shame, but rather an opportunity to learn. This gives me hope because I can finally transform what I experienced painfully into something positive and tangible. It's gratifying to realize that overcoming adversity isn't just an internal feeling, but something that manifests itself in the world around us. I also started investing in myself in ways I never had before. I learned to recognize my limits and respect my body and mind. I exercise regularly, seek therapy, and pursue hobbies that previously seemed superfluous. Each small personal achievement adds to the feeling that I can truly rebuild my life. It's a daily motivation to see that even after so many years of pain and silence, I still have the capacity to grow and reinvent myself. What keeps me most motivated is realizing that overcoming is continuous, but that every step counts. I've learned that there's no definitive endpoint, but rather a sequence of achievements that add up. And every gesture of care, recognition, or help to others is a reminder that it's worth continuing. Today, I wake up knowing that my life has purpose, that I can inspire others, that I can transform my pain into strength and motivation. And that makes me feel like I'm finally living, not just existing.